Television is not the truth. Television is a goddamn amusement park. Television is a circus, a carnival, a traveling troupe of acrobats, storytellers, dancers, singers, jugglers, sideshow freaks, lion tamers, and football players. We're in the boredom-killing business. So turn off your television sets. Turn them off now. Turn them off right now. Turn them off and leave them off. Turn them off right in the middle of the sentence I'm speaking to you now. Turn them off.
Stop them. An idea whose time has come cannot be stopped by any army.
Welcome to another episode of Eradicating Programmed Ignorance, the Town Crier. And I'm your host, Roger Landry, the founder and managing director of the Liberty Beacon Project, a project I'm proud to say has spread quite rapidly across the globe. We do have a website in Australia that is being upgraded at this point in time. We have a website in Europe. We have a website that is going active again in the UK, several websites in the United States, TLBTV project, and it is because of the expressed interest of you, those who support this project, that we present and continue to increase what we present. And we appreciate you beyond anything you can believe. I need to tell you, okay, an educated society cannot be tyrannized. Or at least it's a hell of a lot harder. And that's our job, to educate. Well, excuse me, for the last couple of weeks, we have been discussing issues of health. The topic I want to deviate off of our track of health wrecking issues is one that seems to do quite the opposite. Today we're going to talk about cannabis. We're going to talk about marijuana, pot. We're going to talk about how responsible does an individual have to be that's consuming pot. We all know about the consumption of alcohol. It's quite readily apparent when somebody's been drinking alcohol, especially to a degree where we start to see physical impairment. In the case of a DUI with alcohol, again, readily apparent. Not so much so with marijuana or cannabis. And this is something that's going to have to fit into society in one shape or form, with the massive movement going across the country to get marijuana legalized, at least on the medical level, and in most places, and soon to be all places, on a recreational level. So I'm going to go over an article today called "The Fallacy of a Marijuana DUI." Yep, I said that. This article was originally written by Chelsea Salvador. Recreational marijuana is becoming legal throughout the U.S. as it becomes more common. States are facing bureaucratic growing pains. One of the biggest issues is how to properly identify and regulate stoned drivers. Currently, there are no standardized testing methods for marijuana impairment. A lack of peer-reviewed, federally funded studies on cannabis has made it difficult to address this problem. As a result, lawmakers and courts are struggling to accurately address marijuana DUIs. And again, for anybody who doesn't know what a DUI is, that's driving under the influence. So let's go over a little bit of marijuana or cannabis's history in America. Marijuana faced gradual prohibition in America starting in the early 20th century. It was outright illegal in every state by the mid-1930s. A decriminalization movement began in the 1970s, leading to medical marijuana in certain states. In 2012, Colorado and Washington became the first states to legalize recreational marijuana. Cannabis is now legal for recreational use in 8 states and medical use in 20 states. More states have legalization bills on the ballot. Okay, we'll go over just a little bit here of the the reasons why such a massive push for the legalization or the decriminalization of marijuana, both medically and recreationally. I would not hesitate to tell you that I am embarrassed to live in a country that has such a high level of opiate overdoses, such a high level of deaths. Have you ever heard of anybody overdosing on pot? It's physically impossible. It can't be done. Okay? There are a myriad of health issues, including addiction, including death, even for legally prescribed opiates. A massive, massive amount of issues tied to regular use or habitual use of these drugs. More people die from legally prescribed painkillers or big pharma drugs in this country each year than deaths by car and gun combined. When's the last time you ever heard of anybody dying from marijuana use? And I'm talking from the use of marijuana, not as a result of stupid things they do while they're stoned. All right. So cannabis is now legal for recreation in 8 states. And I believe it may actually be 9 now, and medical use in over 20 states. This is a if you want to call it a drug, this is a component of society today, a massive component. Over 79% in the last poll that was done of doctors state that there should be a place for, at a minimum, medical cannabis in our medical system. And over 90% of Americans believe that in some shape or form, at a minimum, medical cannabis should be legal across the country, with over 80% believing that marijuana should be legalized for recreational use or at least decriminalized. Okay, so unfortunately, with all of this happening, decades of prohibition meant that there aren't any, or many, I haven't found any, federally funded and peer-reviewed studies on the plant, obviously being cannabis. The lack of scientific research surrounding the effects of marijuana make laws surrounding its consumption tricky. To put it plainly, we still don't fully understand how cannabis works, particularly when driving is involved. Well, I might modify that to say those who work in law enforcement might not know how it works. But there are plenty of scientists out there in peer-reviewed studies that can tell you exactly what it does in the body and how the body reacts to it and what it affects and what it afflicts. Stone driving statistics. Yeah, let's get into this. The Washington Traffic Safety Commission studied 1,773 fatal accidents that occurred between 2010 and 2014. 60% of drivers tested positive for alcohol, pot, or other drugs. Only 8% of drivers involved in fatal accidents tested positive for only marijuana. 12% tested positive for the presence of marijuana in addition to other substances. I can tell you from personal observation that pot by itself is manageable by anybody with half a brain, even under the influence of cannabis. Cannabis with alcohol or cannabis with other drugs, cannabis acts as an accelerant. It acts as a booster. If you have consumed enough alcohol to put you on the edge and then you consume some cannabis, the level of drunkenness, yeah, not a word, but it's effective. The level of drunkenness you will experience is probably comparable to having drank twice what you drank. So again, having the feeling that because you've had enough to drink, couple of hits of pot aren't going to hurt you, but at least you're not drinking anymore. That's absolutely the wrong plan. Okay. I just gave you the statistics from Washington from 2010 to 2014 over 1,773 deaths. The statistics aren't conclusive. More information is needed to establish any trends between marijuana and driving. Now, I can tell you that any state is going to say that because it becomes incumbent upon them to be able to facilitate the laws, to be able to, as representatives of the law, okay, treat each and every individual in accordance with that law. So in order to do so, they have to understand the component that the law affects. That component is cannabis. You and I can lay claim to knowing more verbally than these individuals at state level will ever admit to. So, when they say more statistics or more studies are needed, in 1954, a study was put out saying that fluoride caused cancer. Today, if you talk to the government, they will tell you that more study is needed. I rest my case. So, how marijuana DUIs work? Let's go over that a little bit. There are two common ways authorities use to test for a marijuana DUI. Per se DUI laws. Per se laws set a THC threshold limit. Marijuana's psychoactive property is THC. It's what makes users feel stoned or high. Generally, the limit's 5 nanograms of THC per milliliter of blood. Drivers with higher THC levels are considered under the influence. This approach treats cannabis like alcohol. Due to the differences in how marijuana affects the body, there are issues with this method. And what are those issues? 1, the limit impacts people differently. A seasoned user could be less impaired on 5 nanograms of THC than someone using for the first time. That's not a guess. That's a fact. And anybody out there, either watching this or listening to this or reading this, a majority of us have experimented with or still are using cannabis in some sense. We know this to be true. Okay, the first time user, nothing like a person who may have been smoking recreationally on and off for 20 or 30 years. Number 2, THC traces remain in the body for weeks. Even if you haven't recently used any cannabis, you could potentially fail a per se DUI test. Alcohol, on the other hand, dissolves within hours. Sounds like an issue. Number 3, a universal method for testing for marijuana has not been developed. Unstandardized test methods are error-prone. Number 4, per se tests do not consider whether or not a driver is impaired. Instead, they focus on strictly the THC levels. Yeah, it's not walk the line with a finger on your nose, stretch your hand out, touch your nose, stretch your hand out, touch your nose. In a lot of cases, unless somebody has literally eaten a pound of some of the best bud out there, this isn't going to snag them. Effect-based DUIs, number 2, method of detection. Unlike a THC threshold test, an effect-based DUI test tries to establish if a driver is impaired or not, unlike the first method. Law enforcement will look for clues of marijuana use and conduct a field sobriety test. That's like a per se test. There currently isn't any science backing the validity of this test. This approach works for alcohol, but marijuana is different. If users don't give off the same clues that drunk drivers do, like slurred speech, decreased motor skills, and the smell of alcohol. Additionally, we still don't know enough about how marijuana impairs people, if you can call it impairment. This is especially true when accounting for different levels of tolerance, something we've just discussed. As a result, effect-based tests aren't reliable in a court of law. So We've got the effect-based DUIs, and we've got the per se DUI laws, each which are inherently flawed. Why is it hard to test drivers for marijuana? Lack of reliable testing methods. The current scientific understanding of how marijuana affects our bodies is still unclear until we have more research and certainly some certainty on the actual impacts. It's tough to conclusively test anyone. Counties use different testing methods, urinalysis, blood draws, saliva swabs, field sobriety tests, and more. It's hard to prove the validity of these tests when it comes to cannabis. The lack of uniformity across the states makes for discrepancies in how we test and prosecute stoned drivers. Let's remember THC is fat soluble. And since THC is fat soluble, it dissolves in a person's fat cells. This means the process runs slower than something like alcohol, which is water soluble. The slow process means that you can fail a THC test days or weeks after consuming marijuana. Anybody here, okay, failed a drug test trying to get a job and you know you haven't had a joint in weeks or puffed off somebody's pipe in weeks, but you still failed? THC is fat soluble. This means although THC is found in the driver, that doesn't necessarily mean their driving skills are impacted by it or that they have recently, partaken. Also, two different forms of THC. There are two different forms of metabolized THC. Okay, one is hydroxyl and the other one is carboxy. And I'm not going to go through all of the little dashes and stuff after the names, but these are the two different types of THC. Hydroxy THC is psychoactive metabolite of THC. This is the compound of the plant that makes you stoned. In contrast, carboxy THC is not psychoactive, and it stays in your system longer. More tests looking to detect sobriety search for any THC. Yeah, at least most tests do. Not just the active hydroxy THC. If a test detects THC, it may very well be carboxy THC. This doesn't indicate the individual was actually driving impaired. Failing an alcohol breathalyzer, on the other hand, means alcohol is currently in your system. Are we seeing the divisiveness between the two? Where the standard tests for alcohol in no way apply here. For infrequent versus frequent users of marijuana, the variance is how long you would test positive can range from 4 to 12 weeks, depending on the quantity as well as frequency of use. Whereas with such a wide gap, it is easy to see why determining intoxication is so difficult. It's difficult to charge someone with a DUI unless you can prove the reckless driving was a result of being inebriated or impaired. Why it's hard to prosecute for DUIs. With marijuana only recently having become legal, there isn't much case law to reference. The spreading legalization of marijuana has only just begun, and there is, it's more than just begun, but if we're strictly referring to the legalization or decriminalization for personal use or recreational use, it's pretty much in its infancy, and there is still a lot of discrepancies in standards across states. Between the different laws and lack of central testing methods to reference prosecution is challenging at best. There are many ways an attorney can poke holes in a case with improper testing and faulty procedures. Police forces aren't fully trained or equipped yet to deal with marijuana DUIs. Well, in conclusion, as more and more states legalize cannabis, we will gain a greater understanding of how it interacts with the human body. New studies and peer-reviewed research will improve our approach to identifying stoned drivers. Several companies are working on a reliable testing method for weed intoxication. Always remember the best way to avoid getting a DUI is to only ever drive while sober. Again, it may not be your fault, an accident. It may be that what a cop sees implies fault on your part when in fact it is not there. So the request for you to take a test may not be as a result of your guilt, but nonetheless, it could be a reality. So here we go. We're looking at a situation today where a vast majority, well over 80%, some stating even over 90% of a country feels that marijuana should be legalized medicinally, and a vast majority of those also feel it should be legalized recreationally. We do know that alcohol can kill you. We do know that alcohol is habitual. We do know that alcohol can impair you to the point where you can cause not only your death, but the deaths of others. We do know that alcohol is legal. We also know that cannabis use does not make you aggressive like alcohol does. Cannabis use does not make you, does not impair you physically in a harmful way. It doesn't cause cancer like cigarettes do. As a matter of fact, it's a treatment for cancer. So I could go on and on. We are moving into a scenario where the country is accepting more and more, not only the medicinal, but the recreational use of cannabis. With that comes responsibility. Our responsibility, those of us who may consume, our responsibility to not put others in harm's way. How do you react under the influence? Are you a danger to people on the roads? This is not a frivolous article. This is an article, if you stop to consider it, which considers the safety and health of those around you as you partake in cannabis. I really appreciate all of you listening and all of you watching these shows. Today, originally, I was going to do a second article or present a second show on GMOs with you, but I have recently been in discussion with this with many good friends. If you get a chance, there's something I'd like you to take a look at. Just go and take a look at it on the internet, and that is a website called Cannabis. Now, as far as I'm concerned, this is a very, very phenomenal organization. Not only do they deal with the legalities, they also deal with your rights, and they also deal with medicinal cannabis for those suffering and in the need. It's a great website, it's a great organization, and it's a great way to learn more. Anyway, this is Roger Landry, the founder of the Liberty Beacon Project and the managing director, and also somebody who gets in your face about once a week to give you a little bit of the town crier. This is the Liberty Beacon Project. We appreciate you very much, and we wish you all a very good week.